everyone. Welcome to OneSagesview podcast I'm Sarrah Christensen, your host, and today is February 14th, 2023. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Today, our episode, we're going to focus on Saturn in Pisces, and that's going to be occurring in a few weeks on March 7th, 2023. So Saturn is leaving Aquarius, and that means it is leaving the sign of its rulership. And so we're all on the cusp of something very big in the shift of just Saturn alone, but we have more than that. So I'm delighted to have a conversation today with our guest, Michael Bartlett, which I am so delighted to have. So welcome, Michael. I'm going to do the intro for you. So, Michael Bartlett, I've known for a few years now, and I want to introduce him. He is an astrologer who blends Western, traditional, esoteric, and modern astrology. His core energetic training, highly intuitive nature, 3 decades of business experience, and over 2 decades of astrological wisdom give him an extensively resourced toolbox. Michael is the author of 2 books, and they are Astrological Mavericks, Do You Have What It Takes to Change the World? A book about individuals with planets on their chart's angles, and Astro Theater, a revolutionary approach to the ancient art of astrology, in addition to being past interim president of Kepler College and offering webinars, workshops through them. And he also offers experiential intensives, readings, speaking engagements, and workshop intensives. So for more information, you can visit him at coremichael.com, and he can help you with facilitating the change you seek. So welcome, Michael. I'm so delighted to have you. So
Bless you, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. It's always a treat to
awesome.
speak
So
with
thank you
you.
for joining me. So I like to just get right into it. That's me and my personality with the Aries rising. So let's dive into different views. I'm primarily an evolutionary astrologer. I studied with Stephen Forrest and also Dimitri George on traditional astrology, though I primarily focus on the soul. That is my intent as an astrologer. So I want to learn more about your esoteric and kind of Western traditional, because I don't quite understand Western. I know what Western is. Is that the same thing that I'm thinking? Foundations, and I'm curious to see how you look at Saturn and Pisces, but kind of get an overview of what that means in like that context. That would be great.
Definitely. Well, for the longest time, I had on my website, on my bio, traditional astrology, and then what I realized is traditional astrology is really more that sort of, the ancient Greek, the old ways of looking at things. And while I'm a whole sign astrologer, I use they limit their work at Saturn, right? Because that was the last planet you see, and that's our topic for today anyway. But Saturn's the last planet you can see with the naked eye. So our ancestors, that was the last most important planet, and
Right.
so that's where it ended. And so adding the Western to it, Western and modern, means not only am I looking at it with a little more of an individualistic Western viewpoint, but also a humanistic psychological orientation and incorporating
Okay,
the
I
outer
see. So that is
planets
slightly different. Yeah.
because I find
Okay.
them to be so valid. So it's like one of these things because I think a traditional like our modern astrology is like kind of like how we're looking at things now, but the truth is I'm a little more of that old school astrologer, and then I'm self-taught. I learned from learning from various
Mm-hmm.
astrologers, various books, going to different talks, learning from different, getting a wide variety, not going actually to like Kepler College and getting
Mm-hmm.
like a degree in it, or going through the OPA program
Mm-hmm.
or the NCGR program, but more of that old school. And so there are ways in which that I have understandings in certain things, and then of course there are certain things where I don't have as much of a width and depth of understanding because it just isn't something you use on a daily basis, or it isn't
Okay.
applicable based on the work that I do. Now, where the esoteric work comes in, I learned that through working with
Mm-hmm.
Alan Oken for many years. And what I appreciate about that, because I believe that we're all spiritual beings
Mm-hmm.
having a physical experience. And so I like to see a larger context that is more
Mm-hmm.
soul centered, that is holding the container for, quote, the personality, which is how I see more traditional. The regular astrology is more
Mm-hmm.
personality based. So when you step into the esoteric rulerships, it's like a
Mm-hmm.
higher octave. So for you being an Aries rising, they would say that traditionally that your Mars is the ruler of your ascendant, whereas on the esoteric level, it's Mercury, and it makes sense because
Well, that's a flip,
right
right?
when
I
you
didn't
think
even
about
know
it, it's
that.
like hello, when you literally think about it, hello, Mercury, right? Stepping from that instinctual way in which Mars just, what they say about Aries is where angels fear to tread because they just move
Mm.
forward. There's not, this, it's like, open mouth, insert hoof is what I say for Sagittarius. I'm Sag rising, so that's my problem. But with Aries, it's just like it's willing, it'll accidentally step into lava because it's just like, oh well,
Yeah.
we're just going to move forward. But when you engage, when you step out of that personality level and into onto a soul or a conscious level oriented life, and you start using Mercury, that means you're going to start thinking about what your plan is. You're
Mm.
going to strategize. You're going to come out like, oh, well, maybe my path needs to be this way. It's not going to be like so
Mm.
cardinal and
That's
so
fascinating.
instinctual,
I've
right?
never really dove into
So that's
that
just one little
esoteric.
example of it. So
I'm curious about. I mean, I have looked at Alan's book, but I have not like dove into it because I was at that point. Like I'd already studied with Dimitri. I'm like, if I add one more thing, my head's gonna explode. So, though I am very curious about horror.
I think that's so wise to say that, Sarah, because I see astrology as being this huge field with innumerable rabbit holes into which any
Mm-hmm.
of us can fall. So I mean, like, you mentioned two of my books. I mean, the angular planets is one of my holes. Astrology, esoteric is
Mm-hmm.
one of my holes. And what's nice is you can actually burrow into one of those holes and spend a whole lifetime and still not be in
Yeah.
and reach the end of it. So it's really smart, I think, to go like, I think I'm going to stick it. My thing recently is like understanding and seeing human
Oh,
design because I
interesting.
think it takes astrology into a whole
Mm-hmm.
other level of understanding. And I wish I had learned that, but it's like I know enough
Mm-hmm.
that I can pepper my astrology
Yeah,
work with it,
I looked at human
but I know
design
that I don't
about
want to
10 years
spend.
ago, and I was just kind of opening all the stuff for astrology. So it was kind of overwhelming to have both at the same time. It's like, oh, these are very similar in some ways, you know? But I felt like I have too much that I'm trying to absorb with the astrology at the time. So I have the book, but that was like 10 years ago or something. So, and a lot of folks in the community I know focus on human design. So that's kind of interesting. So, and kind of continuing kind of where we focus and try to master, right? That's Saturn. So I as an evolutionary astrologer, I like to look at the personal first before I kind of go into the big, because I always try to take in my readings with people, I go kind of macro. You're in this environment, somewhere in the world, and go macro to individual. I sweep down to that pretty fast, but from this context, I like to focus on people. That's the whole point of this thing. But we have all this external stuff that we are operating within, right? So I look at it like that. So I look at kind of the soul's intentions, the lunar nodes, Pluto. I mean, I'm under the foundation of Stephen Forrest and how he looks at it, slightly different than Jeffrey Wolf Green's material, but still very similar. And how someone's going to navigate their life, and so this kind of movement of Saturn out of its own signs of rulership, and Stephen uses the co-rulership, which I love because in the back of my mind I can do the traditional, and then I bring it in where it makes sense from technique perspective. But for an individual who's sitting at with in front of me, one on one, and maybe for you the same, that you want to kind of get down to what is it for them. This is for what's going to be beneficial for them and helpful from the context, I think, of the soul, because when you look at a larger scale, it kind of like brings out the painting so you can look at the whole thing. Um, so we have this Saturn shift, March 7th. From an EA perspective, I look at kind of like, how does that bear into, someone's nodal, their own Saturn? How is it going to be in a complementary sign, or is it going to be in a very, very different kind of element than their own natal Saturn? So how do you look at that when you're approaching, and for your own because I have Saturn personally in Taurus. So when Saturn merges into Pisces, it's going to be at a sextile quite quickly. And so for you, what does that look like?
Look at you. Yes, Saturn. My Saturn is at 3 degrees Pisces, so I'm up on my
Oh,
second Saturn return. So I'm very
yeah.
excited to see what that looks like. Saturn to me always has this aspect of especially when it comes to the return of authority and authorship, and very much about how we begin to be our own significant individuated self from the collective. But when you have Saturn in Pisces, Saturn, Pisces ruled
Mm-hmm.
traditionally under Jupiter, and in modern times with Neptune. Saturn being the
Mm-hmm.
father for both Zeus, aka Jupiter, and
Mm-hmm.
Poseidon, aka Neptune. So there's this interesting kind of way in which it comes, and also Saturn has been in Aquarius, which is what is the traditional ruler
Mm-hmm.
for Aquarius. And once we step into Pisces,
Yeah.
all bets are off. One of my favorite images for Saturn and Pisces is, yeah, because it's something, depending on where you are in your stage and your evolution of your soul, it's an aspect of faith when you talk about Pisces. But Saturn and Pisces is
Mm.
sandcastles on the
Oh, I
beach.
like that metaphor. That's beautiful.
And and for me, yeah, and Saturn and mine is in my fourth house with
Mm-hmm.
Chiron, but also making that I'm of that generation where it's aspecting Uranus,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Pluto,
On the
Mercury,
opposite
Venus,
side of the chart, yeah. Mm-hmm.
and Jupiter. Yeah, so there's, it's a very integrated aspect for me. Fortunately, I don't have that Saturn opposition like some
Mm-hmm.
people in my generation, but that Chiron really
Mm-hmm.
is activated in that sense. So we were also that generation where most of our parents were the Leo and Pluto generation, and it was really all about them. And there was a bit of a how do you say it? This untetheredness, right? I mean, I remember as a kid, like going out and taking hikes and being gone like
Mm-hmm.
6, 7, 8 hours. And I don't ever remember my parents being even wondering where I
The Gen
was,
X stuff,
right?
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
right. So it's
Mm.
like communing with nature and being with it. And when I think about it now, it's like I went out like in shorts and a tank top, and didn't bring water. I mean, when I think about it now, it's like, oh my God, what parent would even
Mm.
allow their
Mm-hmm.
child to even remotely
Mm-hmm.
do that,
So
right?
interesting.
But it's also ancient wisdom, so there's the
Right.
esoteric teachings for me. It's this container. Saturn is lead
Mm-hmm.
alchemically, and then when you have and Pisces is the
Mm-hmm.
transcendental waters. So it's this wonderful ability to. I almost think of it too as like being kelp at the bottom of the water, being tethered in
Mm-hmm.
the sea, but allowing to be in
Mm-hmm.
relationship with the flow. The what they call it, the bendable reed, the flexible reed doesn't
Yeah.
break in
Oh,
the
yeah.
wind.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because it's got the base that holds it at the root, but it's really flowing with that. And I think that's like a higher view of it, like in terms of allowing things to flow. And this is ongoing, I think, for me to kind of like grasp that it's not always going to go like we think it's going to go, and to bend with that, to flow with
Right.
that, to release, surrender are some key words for Saturn and Pisces in my mind, or what might be opening up and revealing because you have that place where you're kind of pulling back and allowing. And yeah, that's a very nice way to imagine it.
Right? Pisces isn't a
Mm-hmm.
forcing energy. Across the way over there in Virgo, that's the
Mm-hmm.
pushy energy, right? Pisces is like it has to let go of that order. It has to realize that there's something like one of the examples I don't know, these are like
Mm-hmm.
all koans, right? These the sound of one hand
Mm.
clapping. If a tree
Mm-hmm.
falls in the forest, does and no one's there to listen
Mm-hmm.
to it, does it make a sound? These things that are meant to disengage the critical mind and to allow for a larger consciousness, right? So there's that Saturn in holding the container for Pisces, the
Mm-hmm.
larger consciousness, the transition. Pisces is about letting go. It's the
Right.
balsamic sign, right? It's that sign that is like, it's, like when you grab something in the water, have you ever tried to like, oh, I'm going to grab this little piece that's floating in the water there, and you keep like, first of all, you
Mm-hmm.
realize like, oh, it's not, the visuals are
Right.
completely wrong for one, and then if you try and grab it,
Mm-hmm.
it slips through your hand at the last moment when you do it because it
Mm-hmm.
squishes, so the water pushes out, but you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to learn. And people who scuba dive or snorkel, like learning the different ways that we
Yeah,
need to
that's
be in
true. That's
water.
really good. I like that.
Yeah. The other thing I think of is that way in which those of us who are really super sensitive, we have to be very careful that we don't put on weight as a way of
Oh,
protecting
that's
ourselves
interesting.
and our sensitivity, because that is
Mm-hmm.
mostly water. And so, when we think about a lot of people who are really
Mm-hmm.
psychic and very emotionally sensitive, what we find is that there's an idea, and this is what I learned from my core energetics. There's an idea that the body and the mind come up with, thinking like, oh, if I put on some more padding, I'll
So
be safe.
good.
But the truth is from water, if you drop your radio into the bathtub, that shock goes through. If you make a
Just so
sound in
fast.
water,
Yeah.
it goes
Mm-hmm.
through immediately. So,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
the same with our bodies. So, like, when we get bigger, we actually are making
Yeah.
ourselves. It's
So I want to talk
counterintuitive.
about the Saturn ingress chart. Now, where you are in the world, that will kind of vary on what's going to be the rising sign in that moment. I'm on the West Coast. You're in Mountain Time. But we still have in that chart, we have the moon in Virgo, and it's in a full moon phase. And we have Mars out of bounds still in Gemini at a it's square by sign, right? So I'm curious. I always think there's some value in looking at the actual ingress to kind of like position ourselves, right? Like this is the energy of that impulse. And wherever you are in the world, that's going to vary where it might be angular or whatnot, right? So that's always valuable to take a look. Use the software at astro.com if you have to. But I really like to look at that. I always look at ingress when I'm, big planets. Any of the planets really, but it's really those outer ones for sure, and Saturn and Jupiter and so forth. Is what does it look like in that chart? What are some of the kind of those things that are really stark? And that really is the thing that really shows up for me in this chart is the Saturn is in Pisces, but the sun is in Pisces, and the moon are at the Virgo and the Pisces. So that's full moon. But it's really that stark contrast of the Mars coming in and at a T square, right? So, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, okay, the shift, how I might be feeling, and the body? The moon is kind of like the mood, the tone, and then what might be kind of what I call the disruptor. Mars is the disruptor here. Can you kind of like give me some insights, like what you think about this? I
Sure.
think that would be great.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, you bring up. I mean, there's a lot of complexity in what you speak to, because when you talk about a full moon, there's a realization, there's a visual. It's a full on projection, and it makes it easy to see. So it's that Virgo sitting there going like, hey, are you doing? And actually, the moon is the esoteric ruler for Virgo. So this is a really
Mm.
spiritual
So that's
moment that people
heightened, the
can take
spiritual
great advantage
context
of.
of it. Oh, from an esoteric. Mm.
That would be very heightened, yeah, and especially, and then Mars is that which, when you think about it just from the glyph standpoint, esoterically, it's that
Mm.
which inserts. It allows for inserting something new and a great opportunity, and they're
Mm-hmm.
all mutable. So I love that while it's a T square and it can be really painful, it's mutable, which means like if it was a fixed T square is, again, we're getting
Right.
kind of
This
back to
is
what we are talking about,
mutable.
where the reed
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
non-bendable. Exactly. But so we have that. And then I don't know if how you see this, but for me, whenever I would call a T square an incomplete grand
Mm-hmm.
square, because
Grant the leg.
it's missing the
Sag.
leg off, from Gemini over
Yeah,
there into
Sagittarius.
Sagittarius. And so what I would say is, especially people who have what 16 through
Mm-hmm.
21 of Sagittarius are going to
Right.
be really activated by that, and it helps to ground it. Even though like a grand cross is not really necessarily, it's considered something that's going to be a little bit challenging, but when you get that fourth leg, it allows that energy
Mm.
to have somewhere
This
to
is
go
interesting.
with it. But I would say this is that people, especially because now until April 21st, all the planets
Mm-hmm.
are in direct motion. I think this is such a great opportunity time for people who are wanting to launch their website, launch their
Hello.
podcast. Hello,
Putting
getting out there,
ourselves out
putting
there, yes.
ourselves out there,
Yeah.
and I just think it's a really great way of working with it. And I like to think of, I like the old adage, we either work with the planets consciously or they
Mm-hmm.
work with us unconsciously. And so these energies are working in all of our
Right.
charts
Right.
somewhere. All of us have Virgo, Gemini,
Mm-hmm.
Pisces, and Sagittarius, as well as all the other signs. And so whether there are other planets there or not, this is going to be making
Right.
some sort of a movement. And with that mutability, the nice thing about the mutable signs is they are those signs that are the ways in which
Mm-hmm.
the seasons change, right? So it's like the ways in which winter
Mm-hmm.
moves into spring. And so what you get is you get this back and forth sort of an option of where you like, oh, do I really want to do it this way? Is this really going to work? I'm not sure. And it's mutable. So it's like, oh, I'm going to take a step
Right.
forward and check it out a little bit. And then, I'll step
Right.
back a little bit and see what it's like. These are all personal too, right? The luminaries, the sun and the moon and the Mars are all very also personal. How we shine out in the world, how we nurture ourselves, our
Mm-hmm.
ego through the sun, our nurturing and
Mm-hmm.
emotional selves with the moon, and then the way our desire nature is, or our quote drive
Mm.
with that Mars. What are we
Mm-hmm.
putting out there literally? And Gemini can be Mars and Gemini can be very
Mm-hmm.
indiscriminate, right? When you think of it as the male member in Gemini, it's about going out there and having ones. I mean, it's like kind of like Zeus energy in a way, right? I'm going to use whatever means I can to get laid with
Zeus.
whoever I want to get laid.
Hmm.
That's one Mars in Gemini. Another Mars in Gemini is I need more
Mm-hmm.
information.
More
I need to
information, more
gather more
ideas.
ideas.
Yeah.
I need to see more
Mm-hmm.
about what
Yeah.
more facets. I need to move
Yeah.
my body. That's the other thing. What as astrologers, and being so tied into these electronic devices, one of the things I think is so hard for people to do is disconnect themselves and go
Yep.
out and walk in nature.
Without the phone.
When you feel stuck,
Yeah,
go out and
without the
walk in
phone.
nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Move the energy, because it allows you, that movement is like moving your lymphatic system, and you're
Mm-hmm.
breathing, and you're allowing more oxygen into your body, and it's allowing this information to come in and out. For those of us who have open doorways to other information gateways, it kind of helps sometimes to like disconnect and just like see what is it, seeing what
Mm-hmm.
animals appear, what birds appear.
Yeah,
It
the
can be
spiritual
really
connection,
magical.
because
And again,
yeah,
here's Saturn
yeah.
and Pisces again, seeing what the magic
Mm-hmm.
is that nature offers us, what is being
Yeah,
presented
I
in the
like it
moment.
because I kind of think of the nature bath as like when you need to like get to ground zero. That's where you go, that, and especially with that Virgo moon of the ingress chart and kind of how that's played in. But I also think with the Mercury in the Pisces of the ingress chart, that's also more spiritual, more meditative, and kind of listening, kind of within and going with that as well. But I think that's fascinating what you've brought up about kind of how to look at the Mars in a new way. I really appreciate that. So.
And on the Mercury part, I don't know about you, but whenever I see Mercury in Pisces or Mercury in the 12th house, I tend to ask, especially when it's in a natal chart, I'll say like, "Oh, do you hear voices, or do you hear the voice?" And they'll always kind of giggle, because the truth is that Pisces is that
Mm-hmm.
liminal space. Liminal is like, when we're walking between worlds. It's like, having. I like that image of the woodcut from. Oh my God, my mind blank. But when they're peeling back and he sees it starts with an F, the
Mm-hmm.
Flammarion woodcut, and he's like lifting it back, and all the starlight is on the thing, and he's on the terra firma. His feet and his
Oh
knees are on the
yes,
terra firma.
the
He's on his
image.
knees, but
Yeah.
he's lifted up the firmament, and then there's the beauty and the
Mm.
majesty of all that is. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
being liminal. Like when we're standing on a cliff and we're looking
Mm-hmm.
over, that's liminal. Like you said earlier, like, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have to step off. That's faith or stupidity,
It's a little bit
depending
of
on
both,
what's
isn't it?
going on.
I-
Well, I mean, it's very Pisces. Pisces and Aries both have this innocence, which is like the
mm-hmm.
Fool card, right? There's this ultimate, absolute faith in something to the point that either is
Mm-hmm.
amazingly true or is amazingly
Mm-hmm.
delusional.
And I think, oh, go ahead.
And
I was just
yeah,
thinking,
sorry.
like because
No,
of,
please.
I mean, I look at both the high energy of something and what might be the low expressed energy, because folks haven't like dealt with some
Okay.
things and how that might emerge in our collective. And when I look at kind of the Saturn in Pisces and what's that's going to stir for people, and with the Mars, in the immutable of the Gemini, I mean, there's something to that too to kind of be aware of. But we are how we like go from day to day and what we're doing. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, just from the collective kind of viewpoint?
Well, oh my God. I mean, when you bring those two, when you bring Saturn and Mars together, those two together are just like when I see those in a chart, like squaring one another, or like I have a lot of friends from 47 who have that Saturn,
Mm-hmm.
Mars, Pluto combination. And oh, that can be such a painful
Mm-hmm.
marker because it's this, it's like things are never
Mm-hmm.
quite right. There's this thing that there's this things you keep getting
Mm-hmm.
pricked, so to speak. And I don't mean that in the male member
Mm-hmm.
sense. It's like in the sense of like that life
Mm-hmm.
just keeps like giving you like
It's
kind
like
of
the
stabbing
cactus
you in
of
a way.
life.
But
Yeah,
it's
I
like
get
it's a
it. Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm. You back up
the
into
cactus
it
of
or
life.
whatever, you
That's
bump it,
beautiful.
you didn't
Thank
mean to.
you.
It's like, yeah. They're not like square exactly though. I
But
mean, they are
quarters
only
are.
it's more that Mars is more square to the sun and the moon of the ingress chart of Saturn and Pisces. So Saturn is just there, but it's not like square. It is square by sign, but it's not squared by degrees.
It's
Yeah.
more sign wise, yeah. Yeah, it's more by sign, which is really nice. And what's nice is it's actually moving into a trine option, right? Because when Mars moves into Cancer,
Mm-hmm.
then it's going to be a trine. And then it's like, I think whatever information we've all been, because the other thing that's unusual with this situation is Mars has been in Gemini for an exceedingly long
Yes.
time, right? So to me, there's some aspect for all of us of gathering information. And I don't know about you, but I was completely blown away by the U.S. elections in November. I was cautious. I mean, I've been losing some faith. As Aquarian sun,
Yeah.
I can. It's I want to remain an idealist, but a lot of times it's hard. It's easier to fall into a frustrated
Yeah.
idealist is a cynic. And so I was starting to get cynical, but there was something that I saw that the American people, and I think especially women and younger generations, woke up and said, hey, if we don't do our
Mm-hmm.
part, Mars, right? If we do not use our own volition to move forward and
Mm-hmm.
make a statement
Mm-hmm.
about what is true for ourselves, then we are at the
Mm-hmm.
whim of everyone else. That's the underbelly of I think we're going to be experiencing with
Mm-hmm.
Pluto and Aquarius is that there's this humanitarian movement that can happen, but the goal is more about raising everyone up. And if you quote don't fit into my vision, then you're maybe not, you don't
Mm-hmm.
belong on my boat, because Aquarius is
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm.
elitist,
Where Saturn in
right?
Pisces is like more like of the humanitarian. It's a little bit more open and flowing, at least in that context, I think. So.
You have to understand. I mean, it's that place of our teachers have
Mm-hmm.
clay feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding that, oh, you're still on the planet, oh, you still
Mm-hmm.
have something to learn, bringing forth that level of compassion for our ego. One thing I like about esoteric astrology is like we say being personal to the impersonal and being impersonal to the personal. So it's learning that
Mm-hmm.
we're not all that. I mean, again, I have Aquarius sun, I
Mm-hmm.
have a Scorpio moon. They're in detriment or fall or whatever it is. And I think where that works with detriment and fall is in that placement of l- learning that it's not all about
Mm-hmm.
me. I'm not all that.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think that's in order to step into a level of consciousness and spirituality, which I think Saturn, doing your work
Mm-hmm.
on a spiritual path. I mean, those of us who are spirit workers, this Saturn and Pisces is really huge for that. So it's like walk your walk,
Right.
walk your talk, and be of service. Your
Yes.
feet are going to get dirty.
Yes.
You're going to get
Yes.
dirty,
And
and it's
sometimes you
okay.
will come up against having to face disillusionment. I mean, I think with Saturn and Pisces,
Ooh,
disillusionment is
perfect.
something that is but when you're walking, it's our task then to go investigate, explore, understand why. And I think, it's that Pisces Virgo axis, right? In terms of, that's the discernment of the Virgo, but you have the imagination, but there can be disillusionment that you need to have to break down and look at, but also return.
But what a wonderful gift that it's happening with the ingress is happening with the sun moon opposition, which is the full moon, because it allows us to actually say, hey, you know what? I am not quite
Mm-hmm.
perfect yet. I believe that as long as any of us are on the physical planet, our work isn't done. That's kind of like I don't think we're removed before our work is done. So I mean, even though the Dalai Lama is a brilliant, spiritually advanced, amazing human being, clearly he still is doing some work because he's
Yeah,
on the
and he's going to
physical
be having
plane.
his third
That's not
Saturn
a bad
return, so
thing.
there's something to that, right? He's the one.
Right,
He's the one
exactly,
example I found that
exactly.
was Saturn return, but third time. So born in 1935, I believe. So yeah, so it's very interesting. And the Saturn in Pisces, happening in 2023 though, is an interesting mix because of what is happening in 2023 with other planets making ingresses, such as Pluto in Aquarius, happening just a few weeks later on March 23rd. Yes. And then Jupiter will enter Taurus in May, I think on the 16th or something. So these changed things as well. So it was just this huge kind of, but then Pluto is only in Aquarius for a little bit of time. And we have some finishing up Capricorn to do. So, and I didn't put the dates of Pluto in my notes
Yeah.
here, but in terms of when it goes back in, if you have that, let me know. But sometime in June, it goes back. Yeah. But then we also have then a nodal shift in July, like July 17th. The nodes shift away from the fixed signs and go into Cardinal, Aries, North Node, and Libra as the South Node. So it's an interesting mix of things happening for us all to kind of navigate. So I think 2023 for me is shift, 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 let go, surrender. Okay, face it again, get back in the game. What are you doing? So, I'm going to be holding things very loosely, letting the emotions come up because I think it will stir us because, I think that's just part of the mix. And then what is it? What does that mean where I am right now? All the things that I've come to this point in time and kind of taking what I call inventory. And so this year I'm heavily doing journaling just because I find when I'm journaling, which is to me the very Virgo part of my chart, maybe even the Gemini for the writing, both of them. So it kind of gets into letting me really register how I feel. I think we get going so quickly in our life sometimes. It's just like go go go. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, a parent, sister and a daughter and all the things. And it's just like me, where am I right now? And where that goes. And then what are my own desires and where does that go? And however quickly or slowly that comes together and what we feel about that because I think that is so much a part of our navigating life, right? It's like how things become realized for us. And to me, when I hear realized, I think of Saturn. But Saturn says, nope, you've got some work over here to do before you can go up on the next chapter here. so
And that's the truth with esoteric and traditional. In esoteric, we call it the rings past nut, meaning you can't really go on to your next level of learning and becoming if you haven't done the
mm,
work you've done before. Saturn is always going to be about the
yep,
work. What
the
work are you
discipline,
doing?
yep,
How
the
are you getting your
devotion to
work
something.
done? And the
Mm,
investment, it's
mm-hmm,
that investment in ourselves and understanding. I think again, coming back to that sun, moon, Virgo, Pisces is
mm-hmm.
self care, right? And I think being discriminating with our diet, and our diet isn't just food that we put into our body. It's like, what do we watch on TV or what do we watch on our screens? Who do we allow in our life? Who do we interact with? Are we having people who are gaslighting us? Are
Mm,
we having people who are like
mm-hmm,
psychic vampires? Because that's the realm of Pisces as well. Is like, because Pisces wants to
mm-hmm,
accept and love everyone. It's the pure Christ energy of
mm-hmm,
unconditional
mm-hmm,
love, agape. But when we use it from our personality standpoint and make it into conditional or wanting to structure it in a different way, then
mm-hmm,
we're stepping away from that. But Pisces doesn't understand that. It's like water doesn't have a form. Water is based on the form that
mm-hmm.
something else does. And that's what again comes back to your
Right,
Saturn and Pisces. Like what form do you want to hold? What form do you want to
right.
contain your
Which is
waters?
so interesting.
'Cause
Yeah,
Saturn is also
which
the
is interesting
container.
because also with Saturn and Pisces, we have Neptune in Pisces, but it's further on in the degrees. I think in the ingress chart it is 20, where is it? it's at 24 degrees 47 minutes at the ingress. But Saturn doesn't ever catch up all the way. There will be a point that it gets close towards the end of the cycle. But Saturn and Pisces together, I just think there's so much fluidity here, so much water, so much imagination. There is a lot more surrendering to consider, maybe, to release. And I also think of Pisces sometimes as this is where we can grieve what we hadn't realized as well. I'm probably one of 8 billion people that have had a dream, and then the world changes, and then you can't quite reach it, and then things change, and you're like, it's not quite going where I thought it was going to go. So I'm thinking I'm going to change my dream, and that's okay. And so, but there's still that kind of that space where you have to grieve the thing that you didn't realize, or into that nature of just that Pisces release, surrender, and then allow the space. We don't do this a lot in our culture in the US, is allow the space for, well, what's emerging? What really is the next thing that's emerging now?
Well, I'm just thinking. I'm stepping back to Saturn's story. And Saturn played this interesting role in mythology in that was the son of Uranus and Gaia, and was the one who castrated his father and therefore kind of brought him down to reality, but then also was given the same prophecy that he'd be taken out by his son, aka Zeus. So there's this thing about the things that we swallow, there's things that we intake that aren't right.
I like that.
I have a Saturn moon square from Pisces to Scorpio. So for me, there was a way in which I wasn't breastfed. There was a way in which the mother's milk was poisonous, so to speak. So these things in which, sometimes we end up, like, the archetype begins early on, like these things, and then we have to learn to, like, literally, throw up, vomit up that stone, these stones that we've been given, these stones, these stories, these archetypes, right? Because when it comes to Uranus was actually swallowing his children. These are all archetypes being swallowed. So what happens when you're like, oh, I'm not living with my archetype, so I'm just going to swallow it. I'm not going to allow it to exist and it's again that ego part, right? It has to do with that ego that is like, oh, I am so amazing. And what these stories teach us is the hubris of the ego, whether God's hubris or whether human or woman's hubris of, like, women don't have that. It's so male oriented. Women are way more understanding in this place of being in the water, and to think that, Neptune is being Pisces is, there's no sex to it, but it's like, the great waters are feminine. I mean, there's no, but it's all receptivity and allowing, and these things that you can't stop something in water. It's not, these things don't operate in the same way. So it's learning these different ways of being in relationship. And I think this Saturn and Pisces, and especially with what's going on in the world right now, that our past is not, up until like our generation, how we did things would still work. We can't do the things we did in the past and consider that they're going to work anymore.
And then beyond Gen X, when we get into millennials and then Gen Z, etc. Or there's a new one, Alpha or something. I can't remember. But the
transcendental ones. I mean, because they're they're getting out of this. I mean, we're in this juxtaposition in our generation, Gen X, of like, kind of being on this, again, on this liminal space of walking between the worlds, because we know and understand that which came before, but we also, I think, on a very deep level, understand that we came here during this Kali Yuga period because it's amazing bonus points for our soul, and the things that we can accomplish this lifetime are amazing. And we have to remember that, but it's not easy. How does one sit there as a piece of kelp when a hurricane's going over the ocean? Because that's literally the space and time that we're doing. And I love when you brought up the idea of the outer planets when they're switching signs, because when outer planets switch signs, anyone who has planets in those signs are going to
Mm-hmm.
feel that energy. There's an awakening
Mm-hmm.
energy that
Mm-hmm.
happens in that sign
Mm-hmm.
and therefore that house. So, and to think that we aren't being touched by those means that, we're either swallowing things or we're
Right.
not being paying attention. Because the other aspect about Pisces is
Mm-hmm.
delusion, right? And I like the song, "There's no delusion like self delusion. There's no delusion I know." Sang the song of Hollywood or whatever that was,
That's
or
it. Yeah.
entertainment. That's entertainment, I think is what it was. But Pisces is that
Mm-hmm.
place of delusion, and we can
Mm-hmm.
delude ourselves. And Saturn,
It is harsh reality, but we can still turn to our art and create something out of it. I think Saturn and
yes,
Pisces can be amazing for some compositions of music. So, paintings.
and
Your,
building your
yep.
spiritual practice, doing your
Yes.
daily meditation, doing your daily artwork, doing your day, whatever that daily process is, it allows yourself to remember that we are not alone. None of us are alone, that we are all a collective. We just have a hard time seeing. I mean, we're
Yeah.
just a big old mushroom.
But we're all connected like the mushrooms as well. I love that. That's a good one. Yeah.
That's what I mean. Exactly. And again,
Mm-hmm.
there's Pisces again, right? There's a going back into the Pisces and understanding. And if there's anything I would say to people, if you ever start feeling like you're getting out of it, you're starting to lose it, you don't know what the understanding, take your shoes off, walk
Mm-hmm.
on the earth. Don't try and walk on glass or anything that's going to hurt your feet. Walk on something that's, try not to
The
walk on
dirt,
cement if you can help it,
grass.
but if you have to, it's
Mm-hmm.
fine. Walk on grass. Sand on the beach is really wonderful, but anything that allows you to go like, and be connected with Mother Earth, because she is that which
Mm-hmm.
gives us our sustenance. And if you've looked in any of that work on grounding and that kind of
Right.
stuff, it's really super powerful, whether it's plugging in things or whatever, your electrical stuff. And that's why we really have to disconnect from our electrical
Mm-hmm.
devices from time to time. Go out there, be in nature,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
breathe.
Yes. Yeah, this is so good. The kind of looking at the collective just a little bit more. There's a just so because Saturn's in Pisces for 3 years, but the first year to me is kind of like we have to go back and visit things again, and I really do with the Pluto kind of going back into Capricorn. It's like it's, and so to me, I think it's really important and helpful. I think for people who are just brand new to astrology, because sometimes that gets activated during those times when you're kind of in that crisis moment, or a spiritual crisis or whatnot. I mean, that could be very much the case with Saturn and Pisces. Like, what's coming on for me right now with this, or Pluto moving into a new sign and really engaging something in your own planets, your natal chart that hasn't been there, and now it's now moved in, gets a little taste of it, but then it goes back. But then it's preparing you for what's going to come, because Pluto is going to be in Aquarius for 20 years, right? And our collective humanity is going to be going through some huge, huge, I can't even express how huge shifts. Now, we are already getting a little bit of taste of it. I see it just in the media that's coming through on the news. When you're on social media, you can see all of the AI, how we're going to handle ourselves with technology. And then Saturn, 30 years ago was the World Wide Web was created in 1993, right? And here we are at this maturation point, right? And then we're going to be going off into the next leap. But I think 23 is kind of like a lot of shifting stuff on that. So grounding will be very important, I think, but also how do I want to gauge this? And it's going to go so quickly once that Pluto gets in. And we see the shadow first, and what's on the news right now. We see, the balloon incidents, and all of that. How we operate out of fear. This is like, it's just a part of where humanity as a collective is. We may have individuals who can look at it, it's like, okay, but we're still engaging, we're still here, I'm still on planet Earth, and I'm participating I'm in the United States, however I vote or whatnot, but it's like we're participating in this collective thing that's happening, and every around the globe has different things that are front and center for them. I mean, look at Turkey, for goodness, and Syria. I mean, there's so much going on that we can do as humanitarians, God bless them, right? To go forward, and how do we want to participate in a world community? There's a lot there. And, you know, I just want to kind of like put that on the table here. We can discuss that if you like. I mean, what are your thoughts about like Saturn and Pisces, of like where we collectively are shifting, and then maybe what we may choose or let go of, within that context, because it is kind of like this ending cycle for Neptune and Saturn. So the new cycle for Saturn and Neptune happens in 2026. And that happens in February 20th of 2026. So that's not very far. So we're kind of in that balsamic phase of Saturn and Neptune, which is really, really huge. And I don't think people kind of take that maybe into context, because if you go sweeping way back, you can go back to, further back in history where they started that cycle and then come around, right? But it's more to like know that you're in a balsamic phase of Saturn and Neptune. And so things are shifting sands just for that alone. So things will, when you're in the balsamic phase of anything, there's like, it's ending. So there's a lot of endings, and things are finishing up their business before the new. And the new is in Aries, not in Pisces. So I find that very fascinating. So what do you think, Michael? I mean, what do you think about this kind of phase, or the collective where we are, and how we're kind of, you know, navigating all this together, but as an individual?
I think it's such an interesting period of time in that things have seemed so definitive with Saturn in Capricorn and in Aquarius, and then Pluto having been in Capricorn and getting ready to go into Aquarius. Pluto is when Pluto moves into Aquarius, it's going to be ruled by that Saturn in Pisces. So there's still going to, I think that understanding and that thoughtful clarity we thought we had for so long is nothing's going to
Mm-hmm.
be as clear. And what we see with astrology is great. I mean, as a forecasting device, it isn't foolproof because archetypes have a
Mm-hmm.
range of expression, and humans have a range of expression and moods, and there's free will, and there's all
Mm-hmm.
these other things that are going on. But when we step in this place of making a different choice and seeing new ways of being, there has to be a certain amount of letting go, and that's in that balsamic phase. So it's like in astrology we talk about the law of three, right? When we see it once, there's a possibility. If you see it twice, it's a probability. If it's the
Mm-hmm.
third time, it's really going to happen. So I think in that sense of where um, it's funny. Sorry, sometimes I just get like these huge downloads of things at the same time. It's like, and I fall into this category sometimes too. It's that white male way of going like, oh, I have the answers. Like anyone who says that
Mm.
going
I
forward,
think it's like your metaphor of the
because
sandcastle, because you don't know how the tide's gonna like take out one little corner or whatever. You just don't know.
right. And so where astrology is actually really its greatest gift is in hindsight. And so, like when you said earlier on, we can kind of have ideas about what it's going to look like, but the truth is it's going to make way more sense after it's
Mm-hmm.
all over. And I mean, Pisces is that thing, and especially when you think of Saturn and Pisces, you're doing your work, you're doing your spiritual work. So there's a way that you're doing your work and you're not clear and understanding about how you're doing your work. But as long as you have faith and you are doing that one foot and step in front of the other, and maybe you have to step off to the side a little bit and do a little thing over here, the way isn't going to be straight
Mm-hmm.
and clear and understandable. But if you can allow for the fact that the chaos and the wandering ways in which the path will occur as Saturn goes through Pisces
Mm-hmm.
is okay and will give you
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you need. Again, faith, right? If you have faith and you understand, for those of us who have been doing our work for a long time, and just allow for an understanding, go like, oh, you know what? While life can sometimes really suck, I believe and have faith that in the larger context, we are moving
Right.
towards something greater, and that the suffering we're experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
hello Saturn, is for not only ourselves as an authentic, individuated Saturnian self, but we're doing it for the collective. That's
Mm-hmm.
Pluto moving into
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius. That's Neptune moving into, when it
Mm-hmm.
hits that world point, that Aries point, that's going to be huge. Like some of us are probably going to hopefully, awaken more to our conscious being of self and radiate more of
Mm-hmm.
our light for others, because that's what we're here to do, to remind one another. Astrology is here to help us
Mm-hmm.
remind ourselves of who we are and
Right.
why we chose to
It's a
be here
reflection, right?
this
It's not
lifetime.
causal. So, yeah. But it's nice to have that. I mean, yeah, the more that you have done the work and have like practiced wherever like that's like kind of letting go, what I call letting go of the reins. Like, where is this going? But, you have an arrow of desire of something maybe, but you have to let go of the reins a lot. But then if you feel like I don't know where I need to find my grounding. I need to get my feet on the beach, right? Or whatever, but it's more to practice. If you are just beginning that, I think it's really good to practice, like, ask and you shall get an answer, those kinds of things, the mystical engagement with things, the magical part of that, the mystery part of that. That's the Pisces.
Before you go to bed at night, ask your dream state. I mean, Mercury's going to be in Pisces during that time. Ask for the answers and allow for whoever shows up in your life. Like, it could be, you could be at the grocery store buying something and you asked a question earlier in the morning, and maybe that cashier says something that is the answer to your question. That's beautiful. The same as a radio station, right? If you just flick around your radio station, I think spirit spirit speaks. I mean, the thing is that we have to pull the gunk out of our ears, or whatever that ability is that allows
Mm,
us to sense those energies. And again, the Saturn and Pisces will be a great time to be perfecting the ways in which we're in relationship to
mm-hmm.
something greater than
Yeah, and it's
ourselves.
it's in the Jupiter sign, and Jupiter's going to be moving out of Aries and into Taurus. So then there'll be a sextile relationship there for a while, but then before, for a year. So that's going to be interesting how that comes into the mix. What do you think about that sextile of Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Taurus? I really like that the Jupiter will be like, now it's time to get, it's kind of stabilizing, smell the flowers a little bit, have some, fresh baked
Yeah.
sourdough, because I know you do sourdough.
Well, Saturn and Jupiter together
Mm-hmm.
are the great accordion, right? It's the inhale and the exhale, and our society is so Jupiterian. We everything is about, it's
Mm-hmm.
growth, 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 growth. No, we're not going to talk about contraction. We're not even going to call it inflation. I mean, that was like a word that we stopped hearing after like 1978. The word inflation got kind of blacklisted. But like, the truth is, like, we have to
Mm-hmm.
inhale and we have to exhale. And one thing that astrology teaches us too is that there are these cycles, and you can't sit in this buoyant way of like an inhale that never ends, right? Because you're just like,
Yeah. Like,
and we can't be that Saturn that has released all of its air and has sunk to the bottom of the ocean, the
mm-hmm.
deflated balloon, because then it doesn't allow for anything. So it's like this thing of understanding. Okay, it's like, where am I along this expression of the inhale and the exhale? Where am I along the impression? Oh, this is the time now. Like you just said earlier with balsamic, it reminds me of having gone through the process with Pluto on my ascendant, and my astrologer told me, I was learning about astrology at the time, and it was such a great thing. He's like, whatever you do, this isn't the time to build things. So what I decided to do, I'm going to build a new house. I'm going to do all these things. Oh, well, 2008 came along. I went bankrupt, gave it all up, and I'm like, oh, you know, yeah, sometimes it's like, wow, if I had paid attention more. But no, that's, where the ego goes up against the greater. The greater says, that's really cute of you. Yeah, that's fun. And now you
Right.
have to pay the consequence. You get to have a
Mm-hmm.
bankruptcy on your record, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with no credit for
Mm-hmm.
10 years and all that kind of fun
Yeah.
stuff. And it's like, okay, my Sagittarius self goes, oh, and I get to experience this. How fun. Yeah, and inflation, the ego, and I think it's funny because what I realized too, a lot of people get scared by Sagittarius, because there's this wonderful, if people can understand the fire, the innocence that is fire, there's such a beautiful, all-inclusive, come on, join my bonfire. I mean, that's what the fire signs are all saying. But like, people go like, oh, I don't know, I might get burned. Like, well, you might get burned, but it's going to be fun. Well, I mean, for me, it's kind of like what strikes me is having worked with clients who are of that stellium and Capricorn generation, and how many of them, before they had their Saturn return, actually had Pluto over
Mm.
their Saturn. And I just think, it's kind of like a cakewalk having a Saturn return after Pluto's gone over your
True.
Saturn,
True.
So I'm getting to the point, I've got, like I said, Aquarius Sun, and then I've got my Saturn return. So I've got Pluto coming up on my
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius Sun, and then I've got my Saturn return. So I just think it's like this other
Mm.
layering of surrendering, letting go, and stepping into a place of being that Aquarian Saturn and Pisces nature of like really stepping into working with individuals of various chart
Mm-hmm.
placements and reflecting back their divinity in such a way that they are empowered to
Mm-hmm.
be their absolute selves. Like the part with my astrological mavericks was really finding this point in the chart that a lot of people don't work with, and understanding that without having healthy reflection back of these, whether it's a feral planet you have, that's not making any aspects, or an out of bounds planet, or a maverick planet that is conjunct one of your angles, these are planets that require a little more mentoring and reflection back by people who understand that, and not by people who are
Mm-hmm.
afraid of it. I think a lot of what's going to be happening over these next few years, people have been migrating and moving actually physically, people trying to get in the United States or leaving Syria or other places around the world, great migratory things. We're also, I think, individually and collectively making decisions about who are in our circle of friendships, from the concentric, tighter, closer friends, that we can
Mm-hmm.
call on, like they say, like a Scorpio, the friends you want to have are the ones you can call and say, hey, I got a body, can you help me move it? That'd be your inner, for Scorpio, that'd be your inner circle. And then it goes out. But understanding, yeah, but understanding and being clear about, not letting a new person in your life get into the inner circle
Mm-hmm.
without earning it. Not, realizing there are people we have in our lives where we've been friends for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are a close friend, and that person is someone you would want to turn over the keys to your home or give them
Mm-hmm.
access to your bank account. So it's an understanding and being clear about that. There's an old saying, trust in Allah and tie your camel to the tree.
Right.
And that would be another
Mm.
Saturn and Pisces aspect. It's like, if we do our work, one of the things I've been saying to a lot of my clients lately, because of the Saturn part, is like, oh, if you're going to engage in that, then it's your
Mm-hmm.
own damn
Mm-hmm.
fault.
Right.
Right? Like, if we have to realize that these things in which we decide to engage, or the people with whom we decide to engage, if we decide to do that, then we are offering we know that there's going to be a consequence down the line. And sometimes, like a life in 5 chapters, you just realize, like, hey, I'm just not going to walk down that street. Definitely. My website is coremichael.com. That's CORE Michael.com. It's in the process of getting worked on and getting set up. I'm offering right now, for anyone who signs up to be on my newsletter, you get a retrograde calendar for the year, which is really nice. You can know when each planet is going retrograde over the course of 2023 and for how long. I'm also looking forward to being in Istanbul in March for the International Astrology Days from the 23rd through the 26th. It can be very exciting to be out there for that, and getting ready to do some classes for Kepler, which are always really enjoyable and exciting. You can click on my website and click on about and click on events, and you can see what's kind of coming up for me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for sharing where everyone can find you on your website. I'm Sarrah Christensen, your host of the OneSagesview podcast, and you can find me on my website, onesagesview.com, or on Facebook at the same, and Instagram, onesagesview.com. I will be at Lotus of the Moon in-person class for Pluto in Aquarius on February 19th. We will see you there if you're here in the Tri-Cities. This podcast should be out on from the production on either Friday or Saturday. I'm still learning the ropes on this, and I appreciate everyone for participating and listening. And on the YouTube channel that I have, you can share comments there. And thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your month. Take care.